In the soft chaos of a set coming to life, there's always that moment before the cameras truly roll, when the air feels electric with possibility, when someone cracks a joke and everyone pretends they're not nervous. Someone mentions a kickboxer story almost casually, like it's just another idea floating through the room. And right away, you can hear the excitement sharpen. Someone says they'll be first in line. Someone else laughs, already picturing the punches, the sweat, the myth. Because some names don't need an introduction to spark a reaction. They just need to be spoken. Batista, a name that carries weight, not just in muscle, not just in impact, but in the way it lands in conversation like a promise. Something big is coming. A presence built like a wall, yet somehow capable of surprising softness when the story calls for it. When people talk about him being in a project like this, there is a sense of confidence in the room, like the movie already feels real simply because he's attached to it. The kind of performer who can make strength feel human, who can turn sheer power into character. Comment or write Batista to honor them, GSP, a name spoken with respect. Like you're not just talking about a fighter, but about discipline itself. There's a calm intensity that follows him, the feeling that he's built from focus and patience, that every movement has been earned the hard way. Even when it's only a passing mention, it carries the weight of legitimacy because some people don't just act like warriors. They've lived that language in their bones. Comment or write Rib GSP to honor them, Alamusi. Another name added to the list, another piece of the imagined puzzle. Another signal that the people behind this idea want more than noise. They want talent, they want presence. They want performers who can hold a scene when the music stops and the silence gets heavy. The conversation feels light, but the intention underneath it is serious. This isn't about pretending, it's about earning it. Comment or write Rib Alamusi to honor them, and then the tone shifts because some stories don't stay playful for long. Some names open doors into something deeper, something stormier, something carved from rise and ruin. Have you heard what happened to Jean-Claude Van Damme? Not the legend people remember in slow motion kicks and spotlight glory. Not the unstoppable force of the big screen years, but the man behind the mythology. The one who stepped into fame like a battlefield and later vanished from it like a ghost. Because when the lights dim and the cheering fades, life doesn't stop fighting you. Jean-Claude Van Damme was once the kind of figure who felt larger than the decade that shaped him. A martial arts icon who didn't just perform action, he embodied it. Flying kicks, cold stares, a body trained into something almost unreal. For a time, it felt like he owned the screen. Like gravity didn't apply to him the same way. It did to everyone else, but the truth is always more complicated than the poster behind the muscle. And myth was a war most people never saw. A battle fought in private corners. A struggle with addiction. A collision with mental health. A spiral that fame didn't prevent, only disguised. And still somehow a return. A reappearance. A reminder that even when the world thinks you're finished, you might still be standing in the shadows, rebuilding your breath, waiting for the moment to step forward again. This is not just a story about an action hero slipping from the spotlight. It's about the kind of fight that doesn't end when the credits roll. The kind of fight that tries to swallow you whole. And the man once known as the Muscles from Brussels, he wasn't done long before the nickname. Before the cameras, before the world learned how to pronounce him like a brand. He was simply a kid in Brussels, born Jean-Claude Camille Francois Varenberg. On October 18th, 1960, a child who didn't arrive in the world as a ready-made legend, but as something fragile. Shy, narrow-shouldered, quietly searching for a way to become more than what people expected. Some transformations began in silence. At 10 years old. He stepped into Shotokan karate, not as a showman, not as an icon, as a student, A boy learning structure, learning discipline, learning how to give his fear a shape and then break it down with repetition. The training wasn't glamorous. It was strict. It demanded patience. It demanded surrender to routine. But within that routine, something powerful was forming. Years passed and the work added up. By 18, he earned a black belt, a mark of devotion, a sign that the boy who once hid behind hesitation had learned to stand firm, but he didn't stop at what people thought he should be. He reached for ballet, something that drew mockery from the outside world, but built something rare inside him: fluidity, balance, grace under pressure. People laughed, but he kept going. And when he moved later on screen, you could see it, the strange elegance beneath the violence, the rhythm inside the strike. He pushed into bodybuilding too, sculpting himself with relentless focus, eventually winning the title of Mr. Belgium, not just for attention, not just for appearance. It was about control, mastery, the hunger to command his own body in a world where so much felt uncontrollable. Between 1976 and 1980, he built a competitive record: 44 wins and 4 losses in kickboxing and karate matches. Numbers that speak of speed, of sharpness, of a fighter who didn't drift through bouts, but attacked them with intent. In 1979, he represented Belgium on a national stage, part of a team that claimed the European Karate Championship. By then, his reputation wasn't a rumor. It was real, and somewhere in the middle of all that training, all that discipline, a different kind of dream began to rise. Bigger than trophies, bigger than local glory, a cinematic dream. Hollywood. He left behind what he knew and stepped into what he didn't. Imagine it, a black belt in your pocket, a body built like a weapon, and a future that doesn't speak your language. He had no safety net made of fame, no guarantee the world would care. But he went anyway. Los Angeles didn't greet him like a star. It tested him like a stranger. He worked whatever jobs he could find: carpet laying, delivering pizzas, arranging flowers. Work that didn't look like a dream, but kept the dream alive. A future built on sweat and humility. And the language barrier was brutal. So he studied the way he could, learning English through cartoons, listening for cadence and humor, trying to shape sounds into meaning, trying to speak in a way people would finally listen. He bounced at clubs. He stood at doors. He used his skills to keep order while quietly watching faces, wondering which one might open an opportunity. He handed out headshots, waited in lobbies, took rejection like body blows, over and over again, and then one quick glimpse. A blink and you'll miss it moment in a dance movie, uncredited, background, spandex, barely a name at all. But it didn't matter. Not yet. Because he wasn't chasing instant glory. He was chasing the opening, the crack in the wall. He kept showing up. Relentless is a word people use too easily, but in his case, it was literal. He would demonstrate kicks in parking lots just to prove he belonged. He would stand in front of decision makers like his life depended on it, because it did in a way. Not survival, but identity. He didn't cross an ocean to become nothing. Eventually, the tide shifted. A script, a low-budget project, a chance to show the world what he could do when the camera actually cared. In 1986, he appeared as a villain in No Retreat, No Surrender, One Step Closer, One More Rung. But the real ignition came 2 years later, when he was cast as Frank Dux in Bloodsport, a film made on a small budget but carrying the energy of something destined to explode. Bloodsport didn't feel polished. It felt hungry. It was fast and raw and alive. And Jean-Claude Van Damme, his movement, his athletic grace, his piercing gaze made the screen feel like it was vibrating. The world watched and believed, not because it was flawless, but because he made it feel real. Like he wasn't acting out the fight, like the fight was simply who he was. The film shocked people with its success, rising far beyond what anyone expected, and suddenly, he wasn't just a martial artist chasing movies, he was a star, not only because of the body, not only because of flexibility, but because something else slipped through the cracks of the tough exterior, a hint of vulnerability, a strange charm, a human pulse beneath the bravado. Fans didn't just see a fighter in the ring. They saw someone fighting for his place in the world. Bloodsport wasn't just a release, it was a launch. The doors didn't swing open politely. They came off their hinges, and then came Kickboxer. If Bloodsport introduced him, Kickboxer engraved him into memory. In 1989, he played Kurt Sloan, driven by pain, loyalty, vengeance. A story that wasn't just punches and tournaments, but emotion sharpened into motion. He brought elegance into brutality, a dancer's balance inside a fighter's rage. Audiences didn't just watch, they absorbed it. That movie became the kind of cult legend that refuses to die. After that, the work kept coming. Death Warrant, Lionheart, roles that proved he could carry not just fights, but stories. In Lionheart, he leaned into something heavier, playing someone caught between survival and sacrifice, fighting for family, not fame. The physicality was still there, but there was a growing sense that he wanted more than adrenaline. He wanted depth. Then Double Impact, where he played twin brothers, two energies, two identities, one face. One refined, one feral. A risky idea, but he pulled it off with the confidence of someone who knew the camera belonged to him now. Then Double Impact, where he played twin brothers, two energies, two identities, one face. One refined, one feral. A risky idea, but he pulled it off with the confidence of someone who knew the camera belonged to him now. And in 1992, Universal Soldier arrived, pairing him with Dolph Lundgren, pushing him into peak commercial power. A collision of action and science fiction, a box office surge, a new level of mainstream dominance. In that era, it felt like he couldn't miss, like nothing could touch him. But fame is a strange kind of weather. It changes fast. It brings storms you don't see coming until you're already inside them. Dolph Lundgren stood beside him in that moment of career height, a figure carved from the same era's steel. Their pairing carried the energy of the time, two titans in one frame, muscles and myth, action cinema roaring at full volume. And when people remember that chapter, they remember how big it felt. How unstoppable the genre seemed, how the screen could barely contain them. Comment or Wright ripped Dolph Lundgren to honor them, and still behind the unstoppable image, something began to crack. Pressure, temptation, ego, the quiet damage fame can do when it feeds the wrong parts of you. The same intensity that built him, the obsession that shaped him, the need for control, those traits didn't disappear. They turned inward, and his personal life began to spin. He married 5 times. Twice to the same woman bodybuilder, Gladys Portugues. Their relationship burned hot, full of passion and turbulence. In between, he married model Darcy Lapierre, a union that carried headlines and heartbreak, splashed across the public eye until privacy became impossible. They had a son, Nicholas, but peace didn't come easily. He had other children too, Christopher and Bianca. People often imagine celebrities as distant from ordinary love, but he spoke of regret, of absence, of the way chaos steals the time you never get back. He admitted he wasn't the father he wanted to be. Fame didn't just elevate him, it distracted him. It pulled him away from what mattered, and during the filming of Street Fighter, the most infamous chapter unfolded an affair with pop star Kylie Minogue, public enough to become spectacle, damaging enough to deepen the fractures already spreading through his life. There were accusations, scandals, legal storms, emotional exhaustion, a sense that the man who Looked like a machine on screen was unraveling off it, and the darkest enemy wasn't jealousy or tabloid. Noise thought it was addiction, the kind that waits behind the applause and then moves in. Quietly Gladys Portugues, a name tied to a love story that wasn't simple. Passionate, stormy, sometimes broken, sometimes rebuilt. A relationship marked by intensity, the kind that can feel like destiny and disaster at the same time. Her presence in his life became part of the legend too, proof that behind the icon was a man trying, failing, returning, trying again. Comment or write Rip Gladys Portugues to honor them, Darcy Lapierre. A chapter written in bright flashbulbs and complicated pain. A model, a wife, a mother to his son Nicholas, caught in the gravity of a public relationship that couldn't stay private even when it needed to. Their story became headline material, but beneath that noise was something raw to human lives colliding under the pressure of fame. Comment or write Rip Darcy Lapierre to honor them, Nicholas, a name that doesn't belong to the movie posters, but belongs to the real world, the part of life that exists after the set wraps, after the costumes come off. A reminder that behind every action legend is a family story too, one shaped by presence and absence, love and regret. Comment or write Rip Nicholas to honor them, Christopher, another child, another bond, another piece of the life that fame couldn't protect. Not a character in the spotlight, but part of the private world that mattered more than any box office number ever could. Comment or write Rip Christopher to honor them. Bianca, a name that carries the tenderness of fatherhood and the ache of time lost. Proof that even the most invincible image can belong to someone who still has to face the consequences of distance, of chaos, of being pulled apart by a life moving too fast. Comment or write Rip Bianca to honor them, Kylie Minogue, a pop star whose name became intertwined with controversy in that era, a public moment that shook fans and fed the tabloids, turning personal decisions into spectacle. Her presence in the story is brief but explosive, one of those intersections that changed the temperature of everything around it. Comment or write Rip Kylie Minogue to honor them, and as the 1990s moved forward, what should have been the decade of unstoppable ascent became something else. Fall. Cocaine crept into the space where focus used to live. It followed him onto sets, into trailers, into nights that blurred into mornings. He admitted spending staggering amounts at his lowest. The discipline that once defined him was replaced by chaos. His behavior turned erratic. Directors complained. Roles slipped away. The industry that had celebrated him began to back away. Street Fighter was meant to be massive, but it was battered by criticism, and he later confessed he was using during production. The image kept smiling on screen, but behind it the man was disappearing. By the late 90s, the budgets shrank. The releases went quieter. The spotlight moved on, and the loneliness became its own kind of prison. Fame is loud when it loves you and terrifying when it forgets you. And then another truth surfaced beneath the addiction, a diagnosis, rapid cycling bipolar disorder, a name for the emotional storms. The highs that felt like invincibility, the lows that felt like drowning. At first, he resisted it, tried to overpower it, tried to will himself into stability like he had willed himself into greatness. But mental war doesn't surrender to pride. Eventually, something shifted. He stopped drugs cold, brutal, sheer discipline. Training became therapy. Movement became medicine. He fought for his mind with the same stubborn devotion he once fought for trophies. And slowly, the man began to return, not the myth, the human being. This is where part one pauses, not at the end of the story, but at the edge of a comeback that would surprise the world. Because the fight wasn't finished. And the next chapters would not be about winning. They would be about surviving. Comment or write Rip Jean-Claude Van Damme to honor them, ***. He had already lived through the kind of rise that feels impossible to repeat. And he had already endured the kind of fall that feels impossible to survive. But the strange thing about Jean-Claude Van Damme is that his story never followed the clean arc people expect, never the simple hero's journey that ends with applause and stays there. His life moved like a storm, violent, unpredictable, breathtaking, and always one step away from changing shape again. The world had watched him become an icon, then watched him unravel. And in those years, when the headlines grew sharper and the roles grew smaller, people assumed the legend was fading into the background for good, that he had been consumed by the same machine that made him famous. But inside that silence, something else was happening. He was still alive, still training, still trying, still wrestling with the mind that could lift him into euphoria one day and crush him into emptiness the next. Rapid cycling bipolar disorder wasn't just a label, it was a battlefield he carried with him everywhere. Invisible to the crowds, but relentless in its pursuit. Some days he felt unstoppable, as if his bloodstream had been filled with pure electricity. Other days he couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't climb out of the heaviness that wrapped itself around him like chains. And for a long time, he didn't know how to explain it. He didn't know how to ask for mercy from a world that only understood strength as silence. Yet slowly, painfully, he began to speak not in the language of movie trailers or publicists, not in carefully rehearsed lines, but in something raw, something closer to truth. He talked about the chaos inside him, about the shame, about the fear, about the confusion of being celebrated as invincible while privately collapsing into fragments. Because sometimes the bravest thing a fighter can do isn't throw a punch. It's admit he's hurting. And in doing that openly, publicly, he cracked the door for others, especially men who had been taught all their lives that pain should be swallowed, never spoken. He became something unexpected, not just a symbol of strength, but a symbol of vulnerability surviving the storm. The world that once dismissed him as a joke began to look again, not because he was kicking higher, but because he was standing honestly. Reclaiming control wasn't instant. It didn't arrive in one triumphant moment. It arrived in rituals, in structure, in sweat and routine, in repetition. Training became prayer. Movement became grounding. Fitness wasn't just vanity anymore, it was survival. It was the only language that calmed the war inside his chest. He was no longer fighting opponents. He was fighting himself, and for the first time in years, he was winning. But even victory has to prove itself. A private comeback isn't enough when the world remembers your collapse more than your climb. Respect, once lost, doesn't return on demand. You have to earn it again, one moment at a time. And then, out of nowhere, Jean-Claude Van Damme did something that nobody expected him to do. He stopped pretending. He stepped onto the screen and played himself. JCVD arrived in 2008 like a quiet earthquake. No glowing hero. No unstoppable warrior. No invulnerable machine. Just a man, aging, regretful, struggling, carrying the weight of everything he'd broken, everything he'd lost, everything he wished he could rewrite. It wasn't a parody. It was a confession in cinematic form. Critics, who had once rolled their eyes at his name, suddenly leaned forward, because the performance wasn't about showcasing his strength. It was about exposing his weakness, the kind of honesty that can't be faked. The kind of honesty that costs you something to give away. The film hit differently. It felt real, like someone had finally torn the mask off and looked straight into the camera with trembling hands. And in the center of it was a moment that audiences didn't forget. A monologue that didn't feel like acting at all. It felt like the truth finally breaking. Through years of bravado, a man talking about failure. About shame. About Trying to be something he couldn't hold on to. It didn't just resurrect his career. It redeemed his humanity. The world had spent decades seeing him as a body in motion, but here they saw something deeper, a soul trying to stand back up. And somehow that honesty made him stronger than ever, because anyone can look fearless in an action film, but it takes something else entirely to look directly at your own collapse and say, I'm still here. The industry noticed. The audience noticed. People who had once mocked him now spoke his name with a different tone, one lined with respect. He wasn't the punchline anymore. He was the survivor. And when you survive long enough, the doors that once slammed shut begin to open again, slowly, cautiously. But undeniably, that's how he found himself in The Expendables 2 in 2012, a film that felt like a reunion of legends, a gathering of the action era's giants. Jean-Claude Van Damme joined the lineup, not as the hero, but as the villain, cold, sharp, dangerous. Playing Jean Villain with quiet menace, moving like a predator who didn't need to prove himself anymore. It was poetic in a way. Outsider once, fighting his way into Hollywood's circle, finally sharing the screen with the icons who had dominated the same world. Sylvester Stallone, a towering figure in action history, a name that shaped an entire generation's idea of what a cinematic warrior looked like. His presence in that world was almost mythic. Grit, resilience, endurance. Comment or write ripped Sylvester Stallone to honor them. Arnold Schwarzenegger, a legend forged in sheer presence, the kind of star whose silhouette alone could fill a theater. A symbol of blockbuster power, of strength that felt carved from steel. Comment or write rip Arnold Schwarzenegger to honor them, and in the middle of them, Jean-Claude Van Damme, no longer competing for space, no longer desperate to be accepted. He belonged. And he proved it by stealing scenes without screaming for attention. He moved with control now, with purpose, with the awareness of someone who had learned what fame costs and what redemption requires. It wasn't the reckless energy of his earlier years. It was the precision of a man who had lived through fire. What followed wasn't just a comeback, it was reinvention. He stepped into comedy, not as a joke, but as someone finally confident enough to laugh at his own mythology. He leaned into self-awareness, showing audiences a side of himself they hadn't expected. Playful, sharp, surprisingly warm. He took smaller projects. He embraced the internet era. He engaged younger audiences who didn't grow up watching him dominate the 90s, but discovered him as a legend with scars and stories. He became a brand again, only now. The brand included the truth, not just the muscles, the man, and then came a surprising leap into television. Jean-Claude Van Johnson, a meta-world, part spy story, part parody. Van Damme playing a version of himself that was both exaggerated and strangely honest. A washed-up action star with secret layers, fighting not only external enemies, but the absurdity of his own image. It was strange. It was bold. And it worked because he wasn't mocking his past. He was reclaiming it. He wasn't hiding from the joke anymore. He was standing inside it. In control. Animation became another unexpected chapter. A way to reach audiences without needing to leap, kick, or bleed on screen. His voice carried that signature edge, instantly recognizable. Instantly his Kung Fu Panda 2, Kung Fu Panda 3, new generation hearing him not through old VHS tapes and late night reruns, but through animated worlds where legends live forever. And in Minions, The Rise of Gru in 2022, his charm found another lane, proof that his presence wasn't trapped in the past, that even when the physical roles changed, the magnetism remained. He adapted. He evolved. He stayed in the conversation. But the most haunting part of his journey wasn't the projects people saw. It was the ones they didn't. For years, He poured himself into something deeply personal, a film called Full Love, also known as Frenchie. He wrote it, directed it, starred in it, a project meant to be his most honest artistic expression, the closest thing to the man behind the action star, and yet it remained unreleased. No premiere. No grand arrival. No studios celebrating his work, just a finished dream sitting in the dark. But he didn't abandon it. He kept polishing it, reworking it, holding on to it with the stubborn devotion of someone who refuses to let a piece of his heart vanish without a chance, because some art isn't made for money. It's made for survival. It's made to say, "This is who I am when the noise stops. As time passed and the cameras rolled less often." He shifted again, this time not toward entertainment, but toward purpose. He became an advocate for animal rights, speaking out against poaching, raising awareness for endangered species, using his platform for something that didn't feed his ego, but fed his conscience. He also continued to talk about mental health, about bipolar disorder, about the hidden wars people fight in silence, especially men, especially those who feel trapped inside expectations of toughness. He made the message simple. Strength isn't silence. Strength is facing what's inside you without running. And in his personal life, he leaned into structure more than ever. Clean living, grueling routines, meditation, a focus on balance, a man once known for volatility began to resemble something calmer, not because he had become perfect, but because he had learned what it meant to ground himself. Physical discipline became spiritual stability. Training became peace. He didn't train to conquer others anymore. Trained to calm the war within. Fans reached out to him, people battling addiction, anxiety, self-doubt. And he didn't respond like a distant celebrity. He responded like someone who understood, because he did. His journey stopped being only about action cinema. It became about impact. And through that, he found something fame never gave him: peace. Still, the world couldn't let go of what he built. His legacy echoed through pop culture like an old drumbeat you still feel in your chest. The nickname stayed. The legend stayed. The muscles from Brussels. Not just because of his body, because of his presence, because of the way he brought martial arts to the screen with rhythm, with elegance, with the dancers. Grace inside a fighter's storm. He made fight scenes feel like choreography, like poetry in motion. Like violence shaped into art. He inspired future martial artists and action performers, names like Scott Adkins and Tony Jaa, who were shaped in part by the blueprint he carved into the genre. His signature moves became myth: the 360-degree helicopter kick, the full splits, the stoic stare, the confidence that didn't need dialogue to speak. His films became staples, not just entertainment. Blueprints. And even when pop culture turned him into memes, parodies, and jokes, the respect underneath never truly vanished. Because deep down, everyone knew he was real. He never fit the mold. So he broke it. Jean-Claude Van Damme's story is proof that legends fall, sometimes publicly, sometimes painfully. But what defines them isn't the fall. It's the rise afterward. It's the willingness to rebuild. It's the courage to face the mind, the shame, the regret, and keep going anyway. He walked through bright lights and dark corners. He faced fame, failure, addiction, and diagnosis. He lost pieces of himself. He found pieces again. And now, in this quieter chapter of his life, one truth remains undeniable. He was never just an action star. He was a survivor. Comment or write Rip Jean-Claude Van Damme to honor them.